Good morning, everybody. We had a few technical difficulties there. All the geniuses in the room, and the HDMI cable was unplugged. I actually rebooted the laptop because the HDMI cable was unplugged. Yeah. So, thanks to the guys for inviting me, and thanks obviously to our sponsors, Phil and the crew from 2 Pint Software. Phil, please hang around to listen to Phil talking this afternoon about the products that they developed. They're on another level. So we're going to talk about the Cloud Management Gateway. I only said implement a CMG solution in 30 minutes to get everybody to come. That's not what I'm going to do at all, right? What we're going to do is we're going to talk about the CMG, what it's all about, the ins and outs of it, and then we're going to go through the tasks that need to be done, and I can show you how you can actually do this in about 30 minutes, okay? So it's early. I want you all to be awake, so I need you to help me here, all right? Now, my team and I, we've implemented quite a number of CMGs, so I consider it my friend. Right? I've actually got my own interpretation up here, and this is my version of the Cloud Management Gateway. So please say it with me. This is the, okay, start again. This is the Cloud Management Gateway. Do you know the guy in the middle? He's the boss. Okay. So what is it all about? So the CMG, has anybody actually implemented this in production or a lab? One half hand. There you go, one big hand. Yeah, not many, and it's a surprise because, my God, this is where it's at. When it works really well. And you can imagine just in 30 minutes, you can have all your internet-based clients patched forever. I mean, isn't it worth it? Really is. Okay, so what's it all about? So the CMG allows us to manage our internet-based client, facing clients. Now previously, previously we would use internet-based client management. That was good technology, but there were some disadvantages to that. IBM required additional investment for infrastructure. It also created additional overhead and operational cost to support that investment. And the config manager infrastructure had to be exposed to the internet. This is not working for me that well, guys.
And they had to be the main joint.
And
They had to be
yes,
yes.
Sorry, just bear with me 1 second, guys. I'm still having technical difficulty here. Bear with me. There's David again. Okay, so now, because of CMG, we can use this to manage these clients. So what is it? It consists of a Microsoft Azure cloud service and a config manager site system role, which internet clients can then use to communicate with that Azure service. It's really cool technology. It gives us many advantages over the traditional internet-based client management. So what kind of advantages? It's easier to set up, way easier to set up. There's no additional infrastructure cost or minimal infrastructure cost. There's no requirement to expose the on-premise infrastructure to the internet. And best part of all, Microsoft fully maintain the Azure virtual machines and actually run the service for you. Now, there are a few important points to note. You must have access to a paid Azure subscription, as the CMG will generate some cost, although I've seen from my own customers, it's pennies. It's literally pennies per client per month. Okay? Also, it's important to be aware that client management data will actually pass through the Microsoft Cloud. Some customers don't like that. Okay, so these are the typical CMG scenarios. The first one, and this is obviously the most common scenario, where we'll manage just traditional AD join machines that roam out onto the internet. All the supported clients that Config Manager supports are supported by CMG in this way. So Windows 7 for now, Windows 8.1 and Windows 10 devices. The communication channel to the management point can be secured by traditional PKI certificates, where the management point is configured for HTTPS. And the easiest way to deliver that is to configure devices for auto-enrollment using a GPO and an internal CA. There's also a new thing that we're going to talk about shortly, which is enhanced HTTP, in which we can leave the management point at HTTP. We don't have to configure the secure channel, but there are some caveats to that, and we'll discuss that shortly. Secondly, we can manage Azure AD joined Windows 10 devices, and here we use Azure AD to authenticate the device rather than PKI. It's way easier to set this up and maintain this particular scenario, but it only supports Windows 10. And finally, I saw Leon jump up. This is me. Finally, CMG allows us to install the Config Manager client on Windows 10 devices over the internet. All right? So this is very useful in the co-management situation that the two guys are going to talk about afterwards. My opinion, I disagree with the Microsoft docs that say that CMG is a prerequisite requirement for co-management. I don't believe it is. I think it is in certain situations, in certain circumstances, but in general, it isn't. So you guys can put that one to bed for us later on. Okay, so what can CMG actually manage? This is the list. So we can do our software update, data, and endpoint protection. So we can keep our computers fully patched with the up-to-date virus definitions easily. We can get inventory and client status, compliance settings, and we can do software distribution. We can do software distribution to the device if we're using PKI and traditional HTTPS, and to the user if we're using Azure AD. And we can do Windows 10 in-place upgrade task sequences, which is really cool. So essentially, anything that doesn't actually need a boot image, the stuff that we can do within reason. Okay, so what can it deliver for your organization? You can deploy multiple CMG instances in a hierarchy. Actually, Microsoft recommends creating at least 2 for high availability. I'm not really a high availability guy. Robert and I had a chat about this earlier. Config Manager isn't Exchange. If Config Manager's down for an hour, who cares, really? You usually get away with it. So I would be more inclined to invest money in a very resilient backup routine rather than invest it in high availability. But that's just me. Is this recorded? Oops. Too late. It is recorded. Oh, well.
Going against the grain again.
That's me never talking in Ignite.
Kind of aspect of multiple reasons. One of the ways we kept up, don't know about it, there would be a cluster type thing, one comes down, patch, up, next one comes down, next one patch.
Okay.
And use availability, not high.
Slide 20, delete.
Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so as I said, Microsoft recommend 2 instances for AJ. Each CMG instance will actually support up to 96,000 clients. So that's pretty much enough for most organizations. It's not really a hard limit. These are kind of simultaneous connections, and the performance will degrade if you start to go higher. All right. At this time, the CMG supports the management point and the software update point roles, but it's not a great start, allowing you to keep all your internet-based clients fully patched. And as an added bonus then, if you use a cloud distribution point, you can deploy the software to the devices over the internet. And since version 1806, the CMG can actually now be configured as a cloud distribution point as well. Now, I know there was some talk about deprecating standalone cloud distribution points, and you couldn't actually create one that wasn't a CMG. I'm not sure if that's actually done yet, but in the future, in the near future, you will not be able to configure a standalone CDP. It will only be co-located with the CMG. So what is a cloud distribution point, and what does that actually give us? Well, essentially all it is a config manager distribution point hosted in Azure rather than your own infrastructure. It's an optional, as I said, component in a CMG scenario, but it's very useful to allow you to do software as well as software updates. So what are the features of cloud-based AP? I can read them out. So you can configure your CMG to be a cloud DP as well. They support both intranet. So it's a misnomer to think that the cloud DP only serves internet-based clients. That's not true. If you allow the access internally, they can get the clients can get content from the cloud DP as well. You can use them as a fallback content location. They can be added to distribution point groups in the same as the traditional DPs. Config Manager encrypts the content before distributing it to a cloud DP, so there's no worries there. And the good thing about them is you can manually scale the cloud service temporarily if you need to, without actually having the trouble of installing additional DPs. If you were doing a project that required a lot of content quickly, for example. Now, there are some limitations to using cloud DPs. For example, you can't enable it for PXE. I'm probably told that's not true because there are other ways, but traditionally with Config Manager, you can't enable this for PXE. They don't support packages that run directly from distribution points, so all the content must actually be downloaded by the client and run locally. They don't support pre-stage content or AppV streaming applications. And they cannot be configured as pull DPs. So they can use a pull DP, but they can't actually be the pull DP. Okay, so how does the cloud management gateway actually work? So we'll just have a look at a graphic just showing the infrastructure and the flow. This is like my Lego version. So this is our intranet. We have an on-premise Active Directory, which includes a certificate authority. And we have a config manager primary side with the typical roles. So we have management point, distribution point, software update point. So I'm going to show you my lab shortly, where we're going to do some nosing about. And I upgraded it to 1906 a couple of days ago, so we're actually on 1906. And this is the new role on the intranet. And this is the cloud management gateway connection point, which we will discuss shortly. We also have an Azure subscription. Here you can see our Cloud DP and our Cloud Management Gateway, which now are one virtual machine. The Cloud Management Gateway connection point then gives us a reliable encrypted connection over the internet to the CMG. And then Config Manager publishes the connection information that's needed and the security settings to the CMG itself. So, and here we have our internet-based clients. We talked about what supported. All the supported clients are supported with PKI, Windows 10 only for the Azure AD. So what's the traffic flow? So time for the client to get its policy. It realizes it's on the internet and knows the URL to find the CMG service in Azure. So it forwards a request looking for policy using HTTPS. CMG then authenticates the client request using either Azure AD or the PKI certificate, and it forwards it to the on-prem cloud management gateway connection point. So it's a persistent connection, and you don't need to open any inbound firewall ports. We'll discuss the port requirements shortly. The request is then forwarded to the correct role on the on-premise network according to the URL mapping. So in this particular case, it's a policy request, so that's just sent to the management point. The management point then confirms that there is some software to be installed on that client, and it sends the information about the cloud DP. Where is the software? So it tells the client where it can find the content for that software. Then the client requests the content from the cloud DP and installs the software. So that's the general flow. Okay, so cost is an important factor to consider when we're planning a CMG deployment. And charges will be incurred on your Azure subscription, but literally it is pennies. In the beginning we're doing this, people were very slow to take it up because there was no real Microsoft guidance on kind of what this would cost. Quite frankly, they didn't know, maybe. It was difficult to work out. There are a lot of different things to consider. But as it's developed now, we can see from customer data that it is literally pennies. There's a heavy user of CMG here, and I'm sure you'll concur, it really is inexpensive. Very, very inexpensive. I would say it's a lot cheaper than the traditional IBCM way of doing things. You don't need any infrastructure. So what do you need? There are some things you need. So a standard VM, a standard A2 VM is actually automatically created when you add a CMG, because it's literally a VM in Azure. And each one of them, this default is 1, but you can select up to 16. 16 is the maximum. And each of the VMs will support up to 6,000 clients. That's where the 96,000 comes from. So it's 16 VMs by 6,000 clients. But obviously there's a cost. If you're using 16 VMs, it's a higher cost than using one VM. And of course, the Azure VM costs vary by region. Now, Microsoft do publish an Azure pricing calculator to help determine costs with the VMs, but more about Microsoft guidance shortly. So outbound, you're charged also for outbound data transfer, so data egress, which is data flowing out of the service. Now, Microsoft estimate that is going to be approximately 100 to 300 meg for internet-based clients that are doing policy refreshes every hour. That's the recommendation. So that's the guidance. So if you're doing other things like deploying applications, obviously that will increase the amount of outbound transfer. Then you have content storage. So internet-based clients using CMG get the software updates directly from Windows Updates. So you don't have to host that content. So for you, there's no charge for the content storage, which is very cool. If you want to do applications, you need to distribute these applications to a cloud DP, and you will then be charged for the storage of that data. And in Technical Preview 1903, Microsoft have actually added a cloud services cost estimator, allowing you to estimate how much the CMG would cost in your Azure region without actually deploying it. It's new, it's a bit immature at the moment. The costs are hard-coded into the application, so if price changes, they won't change in Config Manager, but by the time it's actually released, I'm sure it will be a lot more mature, but it's cool. It tells you, you can choose how many clients you're expecting to have online at the moment, what you're going to do with them, your region, and it'll generate a cost per client expected per month. So it works very nicely. Okay, so CMG. Although it's simple, there are quite a few moving parts to the solution that we have to get right. These are the general requirements. So we obviously need client computers, as I said, any supported Windows clients, and you have more options if you're just doing Windows 10. You need a config manager site. Do you want some water? You okay? Are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, we need a config manager site. It must be at least version 16.10 or later. I'm using 1906. I always like to keep current. We need a service connection point. Now, the service connection point must be configured in online mode. We need a site system server which will be running the cloud management gateway connection point. Okay. If you're doing Windows 7, which is obviously becoming less and less relevant, and you want to use PKI, you should have an internal CA so you can generate the client auth certificates. If you're using Windows 10, you can take advantage of enhanced HTTP, which we're going to, and Azure AD authentication. We're going to talk about that shortly. Okay. What is next? Yes, so as well as the secure communication between clients and management point, we also need secure communication between the client and CMG and the Azure service itself. Now, you can secure this with a PKI cert from your internal CA, but that's not recommended. It's recommended to use a public SSL certificate. So it would be useful to have a preferred or a favorite SSL provider, certificate provider. I use DigiCert. I'm just going to show you a few bits about how to generate that certificate shortly. In conjunction with that, you'll need to have an externally routable domain. And we're going to use this in conjunction with our cloud service name. So why is that? All right? So when you create a CMG, you're essentially creating a cloud service in Azure. And these cloud services are called something, gerryhampson.cloudapp.net. We need to have an SSL certificate that will have a common name, the same name as the cloud service. And there is no way that I'm going to be able to get a certificate with the common name gerryhampson.cloudapp.net. They won't give it to me. I have no access to that domain, cloudapp.net. In order to get an SSL certificate, you have to verify that you own the domain and that you have permissions to request certificates. So how do we get around that? So we can get cool. So I own a publicly routable domain, emslab.ie. So what I can do is I can get my certificate, gerryhampson.emslab.ie, and I can create a CNAME record in the DNS records for that domain that will direct all the traffic to gerryhampson.cloudapp.net. So I can get the certificate I need without having to mess with a private Microsoft domain. So that's how we do it. All right? But you need obviously access to the DNS records for that domain in order to get this to work. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. And then obviously you need an Azure subscription. You can use an Azure Global admin account, yeah, but you need at least an Azure subscription account to create the CMG. Firewall ports. These are crazy. I don't get this, but these are crazy. So in general, there's not too much to do. We don't need any inbound ports on the on-prem network, but the CMG connection point. Now, I'm clearly saying the CMG connection point here because the CMG connection point and the CMG don't necessarily have to be on the same site system. So if you're a huge environment, you may choose to offload some of the roles. So the one with the CMG connection system has to have some outbound ports open. So if you're using a single VM, which will support 6,000 clients, as we said, then you need to open a single port, and it's only port 443. Now, a lot of times that's open already, so it's no big deal. It's if you start to use 2 and more machines up to 16, that's when it gets a bit funny. Because if you get to 2, you would think it would be 443 and something else, wouldn't you? But no, it's not that. So if you use 2 VMs, it becomes 101.24 and 101.25, etc., up to 101.39 for 16 VMs. See? No. Go figure. I don't get that. Yeah? So that's it. Okay, then certificates. Now, certificates can be a complicated enough area. And this is most likely where people will have problems. So the general certificate requirements are the CMG certificate, this is the one we talked about, which is the SSL certificate of the cloud service. Recommended that you use the public SSL certificate to gain the native trust by the internet clients. And I've explained about the CNAME that we need to do. If you're using HTTPS, traditional PKI, you'll also need to upload the internal root certificate to the CMG. And CMG has to do a full chain validation of the certificate, so you have to include any intermediate certificates if you have them. Okay? If you're doing PKI, then you also have to have a client authentication certificate on the CMG connection points server as well, and on all the computers that you want to manage. The easiest way to do that is if you're just using PKI to manage all your computers, which is the Microsoft recommendation, by the way. Despite all the fancy stuff, it's still recommended to secure your devices with PKI. If you want to do that, then auto-enrollment GPO is by far the easiest way to do it. All right? Now, I've mentioned Cloud DP in there, which I've said is optional. I think I'll just remove that because it's no longer becoming a thing because they're now co-located with the CMG. But I still think you can do a standalone cloud distribution point, but you won't be able to do it for much longer.
Is that what a separate name?
Same certificate, yeah. If they're co-located, yes. Now, if you have a separate box with a different name and all that, then you need something different. Yeah, yeah. Okay, that's that. Now, this is the new cool thing, enhanced HTTP, and not much has been. This is like the secret sauce. So not much has been published about this. And I've tried to get some information about this from David James, but it's like drawn blood. They're not telling us much about it. But we'll tell you what I know, which is pretty much what's in the docs. So, as I said, even though this is available, Microsoft still recommend using HTTPS where you can. But they do recognize that some customers have a challenge with doing PKI. So they've done this to just remove the overhead of managing PKI certificates. So in conjunction with Azure AD integration, they've simplified the process using enhanced HTTP. Now this is a very specific scenario. This is where Azure AD joined devices can communicate with a management point configured for HTTP. These devices have to be Azure AD joined. So the traditional domain box without any Azure AD integration just will not work. Okay? So in this case, what happens is the site server generates a custom certificate for the management point and allows it to communicate. As I said, we don't know very much about it. The config manager admin actually doesn't need to even do any IAS configuration that you would normally do. It's done in the background when you check the box in config manager. Okay? So there's some steps involved. So first of all, you have to configure the management point to use HTTP communication only. There's a checkbox then to enable the site option to use it's called Configuration Manager Generated Certificates for HTTP Site Systems. And that automatically creates an SMS certificate and binds it to port 443. You need to then onboard the site for Azure AD, for cloud management using the Azure Services Wizard, which is a requirement for Cloud Management Gateway anyway. You need to do that. You need to configure Azure AD User Discovery and AD User Discovery. When I did this myself a couple of times, I've done it a few times now, but when I did it first, I had a devil of a time trying to get it to work. And the reason being that I hadn't, and that's why I have it in red here, is because I hadn't done AD User Discovery. I had no reason to. I was managing devices. I didn't care about the users. So, and I just didn't. In the end, I figured it out. Okay, so, yeah, and then you need to configure Azure AD Join. Now, that sounds like a big thing, doesn't it? But it isn't. It absolutely isn't. If you have a customer, if you're working in a place that's already got Office 365 in place, that means you've more than likely already got Azure AD Connect, synchronizing your users to Azure AD. Well, in order to configure AD Join, you open up Azure AD Connect again, and there's a little checkbox to configure AD Join. You then select the device, the OU where the devices are, and those devices will automatically join to Azure AD. If they're 1607, Windows 10 1607 and later will automatically join. 1607 is out of support anyway, isn't it? So it doesn't really matter. Okay? You don't need any further action. Okay. This is a demo in 30 minutes. We don't have 30 minutes, but it's not going to take that long. I'm just going to actually show you the steps that are needed to do our stuff. Okay. What's first? Azure. Okay, so as I said, when we create the CMG, we're actually going to be creating a cloud service, and it has to be unique in Azure. So I've already done this, and I've got a CMG in place. I don't want to mess with it. So it's called gerryhampson.emslab.ie, which the C name is gerryhampson.cloudapp.net. So I'm just going to search for that. You have to see if this name is available, and let us do that. So we're going to create a resource in Azure. We're looking to create a cloud service. Now, we don't actually want to create it because CMG will do that for us. We just want to make sure it's available. So if I type Gerry Hampson, I know that won't be there. See that? That red thing told me, and if we hover over that, it says not available. Now that's very unfortunate. So if I do Gerry Hampson 2, it gives me a green checkbox to say that is now available. So I know I can use that for my service. Now, the DNS name for your CMG does not have to make sense. So I've seen one guy rang me up, and it actually happened to me. I won't blame a customer. It happened to me. So I wanted to have like GHCMG, all right? I wanted it personalized. So I checked if GHCMG was available, and it was. But then I was working with a customer, and they took a while pouncing around with certificates, so it took about a week. And then we went to create the certificate. Somebody had taken GHCMG in the meantime, right? So that's what I'm saying. And it's quite a hassle to recover because you've got to go back, you've got to choose something else, generate a new certificate. It's a hassle to recover. So that's what I'm saying. This doesn't need to make sense. This could be garbage. It just has to be unique, and nobody else is going to rob it on you before you get a chance to finish the job. Yep. Okay, so, right, so what I've done is I wanted to choose Gerry Hampson 2. So if we go into, this is my DNS records. So this is the publicly routable domain that I own, emslab.ie, and I have created the CNAME records which map to cloudapp.net. Because what happens is when you actually create the certificate with these public stuff on it, and when you go to add the CMG and you show it the certificate, it interrogates the certificate, and it automatically changes the name to this format for you. All right. So these names, this part and this part have to be the same. Yeah? And I'm not a great fan of using wildcard certificates for this. I'll just use the common name that I need, and that's it. Okay? So that is the certificate part and the DNS records. Then we need to go in and configure. Let's have a look at Config Manager. This is a 1906 site. So if we look at the site properties, did anyone notice that this has been renamed? We said yeah. Yeah? Is this just 1906? I haven't noticed it before. Because Peter didn't mention it. Is it? That used to be called Client Computer Communications. I was looking for it. I said, where's that gone? But this is the new place, right? So we need to, we don't need HTTPS, which we traditionally did when we're using PKI. So we're going to configure it for HTTP. But this is the checkbox that I was talking about. Use Configuration Manager generated certificates for HTTP site systems. Okay? So we're done. So you can see how our 30 minutes has started. Right? So far, we haven't done anything crazy. Right, and certificate. This is a DigiCert tool for generating certificates. I'm not actually going to do it. I'm just going to show you what you need to do. So go in SSL. I've already had a couple of them in here. So you got to create a CSR. This is exactly what the same principle as you do for when you're in IAS and you're trying to do a certificate sign-in request in IAS. And you know the way when you're doing that, and you have to, so you request a certificate and you get the certificate and you have to finish the process, and you have to finish it on the process on the same server that you've started. And the reason is that you can associate the private key with the certificate. If you do it somewhere else, it just doesn't work. Well, the same thing here. So I've generated this using this tool on this machine. I have to finish the process in this machine to associate the private key. So all I do here is my common name is gerryhampson.emslab.ie. I have to give some information about organization and whatnot. I send it to DigiCert. DigiCert respond almost immediately with some kind of verification, who you are. You reply and say, yes, I'm cool, and your certificate is available pretty much straight away. And then you can download that certificate. So you download that in a .crt format, right? You import the .crt into this tool, finishing this process. There's an import function here. And that has the private key. When we're done, we can take that and we can export that certificate to a .pfx format with a password. It's protected with a password because we need a .pfx format which includes the private key for our CMG. Okay? With that, it's pretty straightforward. Then we need the internal root certificate. The easiest way to get the internal root certificate is to export it from a domain-joined device already. And this is it. This is the client auth certificate. So if I look at the properties of that, and I go into details, no, I don't. I go into certification path, and here's the internal root. So if I view the certificate, I go into details. No, I don't. Is that the right one? Okay, client.certificate. Certificate path, root certificates, yes. Details. And yeah, I was right. So I can copy to a file. And this is the way we can copy to a file, starts the export wizard, and we export this to a .cer format. And that's our internal root certificate. Okay? And this gives you then the final certificates. That's my final certificates that I need. The .pfx is the CMG public cert, and the .cer is my own internal root cert. Now, if I'm doing I only showed you how to do internal root cert just for completeness. I don't need that because I'm doing enhanced HTTP. You only need that if you're doing PKI. Okay? So what's next? So that's the final certificate. So then we just go to add our CMG. You can see how you could have done that pretty quickly. There's nothing majorly complicated there. Okay, so in administration, cloud services, where are we? CMG. Now I've already got one, which is working. So if we go to create the cloud management gateway, and this is our wizard. Now we have a choice to choose, we need to choose an Azure environment, and pretty much all of us are going to choose Azure Public Cloud because the only other alternative is US Government Cloud, which I'm pretty sure we're not going to be doing. And then we have to sign into Azure. Signed in successfully, and you can see the way it's detected that my subscription based on the login that I've given that I'm an admin of. Okay? Okay. Now, if we browse the certificate on file, let me find them now. Somebody stole my certificates. Oh my God, there you go. Okay, let's start again. Sign in. This is eaten into my 30 minutes. Okay, so we browsed the certificate file. Password. And you can see the service name. So the service name is what it takes from the certificate, which is my public name, which is what's actually on the certificate. But you can see the deployment name, so it's actually mapped it for me. So it's going to create this gerryhampson2.cloud.net. Now I think you can actually change that, but don't. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple. Okay? So what are the options then? You can choose your region. I think we're north. What are you guys here? You North Europe or West Europe? I think in Ireland we're North Europe, which I don't quite understand because we're the most westerly point, but I think we're in North Europe. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So you can choose to use an existing or create a new resource group, and this is where you choose your VM instances. It doesn't say anything to you when you choose one, but let's choose two here for the crack. And it actually tells you then that you're going to need to look at ports starting from 101.24. Okay, so create one for now. Okay, this is where you have to upload your internal root certificate. And this checkbox here is, now the other one here is to verify the client revocation. So if you haven't published your CRL list externally, which many people don't, then you'd have to uncheck this box to remove the CRL check for the certificate, which is a security. So this is like a chicken and egg situation. It's a risk to actually publish your CRL externally, but then it's a risk not to have it because you can't check externally whether certificates have been revoked. So it's a bit of a trade-off. So anyway, we'll remove the check to verify it. And this checkbox is what was added in 1806 to allow the CMG to function as a cloud DP. So as soon as we create the CMG, we also have a cloud DP. Okay, and that's it. Go next. You can configure alerts for the CMG to warn you when you reach a threshold for data, etc. And next, and that's it. You go through. So what have we done? About 15 minutes maybe actually doing. So it's pretty quick. This takes maybe 20 minutes to provision, and you can check the log, which is a cloud. I forget the log name. But you can actually see the progress in the log when it's going. Okay, and just in cool Blue Peter style, here's one that works. Here's one that we did earlier. When you've done it, it tells you you now have to do a CMG connection point because it's useless without it. So that's just a site role in Config Manager, Cloud Management Gateway connection point, next, through that wizard. Okay? So once we've done the CMG, we need to configure the components to use the CMG. So the two that we're going to do are the management point and the software update point are the two that support it. So we need to go into the properties of each. So if we look at the software update point. You can add it later. Yes, definitely. The question was, do you have to, if you don't check it there, can you add a CDP later? And the answer is yes, you can. Okay, so here, this is the properties of the software update point. We check the box to allow Config Manager Cloud Management Gateway traffic. All right. How long do I have? Really? Am I? Okay. I need 10 minutes, right. So, all right, so I'll skip through a bit of stuff there. So, yeah, so Cloud Management Gateway like that, and you also need to do the same thing for the management point, which we won't bother doing. What else was I going to do? There's a lot of things that you can use for support. There's a CMG connection analyzer that you can look through if you're having trouble configuring it, give you some ideas what's wrong. There's a dashboard to show you traffic on that things are using. So let's have a look at a client. I want to show you some cool stuff on a client. Okay, so here's a client. I hope it's not gone to sleep because we had some messing with our technical difficulties. It's awake, not good. Okay, so back in our client, we can see in the Config Manager applet that it knows it's on the internet client. What does that mean? That means there's a PowerShell script that I can run to see the active that's a PowerShell script. Show me the active management point, and it actually knows about, that's the CMG. So it's using the CMG as its management point because it knows it's on the internet, okay? So what can we do to manage this guy? Wouldn't it be great if we could just mess with people? Okay, so this is my server, which is in my home lab. So I'm just going to kick off some hardware inventory on that device, which the actual client is sitting on this laptop. And we just see what happens. It might take a few moments for that to kick in. Yeah, I've got a server in my home. Oh, there we go. So that started almost immediately over the internet to collect inventory from that device over the fast channel. It's pretty cool. And that's going to sit there for a second and then kick in. But I was just saying, my server is like an airplane sitting in my home lab. And every time I turn it on, it's like an airplane taking off. So I called my wife this morning. I said, "Can you turn that on?" She said, "Oh God, yeah." So as soon as I finish here, I have to turn it off. Yeah. But yeah, so that started well. This is kind of a good demo-ish because it's quick, but sometimes it can stall. There you go. So that's collecting all the inventory from that device. And if we go back then to the server, we look in the data loader.log file, that will show that information. So what have we got? Like 30 seconds from when I decided I wanted the inventory of that thing to be actually reported back in the config manager console, which is dead cool, over the internet. I hope this quickly does it. Yeah, I had a couple of tricks to show you, but we're running out of time. So I'll tell you a little story while we're waiting for that. There it is. Done. All right, pretty cool. Okay, so we did that. Yeah, so this little story to finish off then. So I said we've done a lot of these for customers, and they generally work very, very well. Every now and then you can get a very difficult environment, and we found this customer that thought they were the most secure in the world. They were a pain in the ass, and the config manager site systems were behind a couple of firewalls, a couple of web filters. Is this recorded? I'm getting old, I forget. And this was the error that we were getting. They said, everything's open. You're annoying me now. We now tell you it's all done. It's you. That couldn't be. So we checked. And this is the error we were getting, which is just, it's not even English, but kind of a form of English. So we didn't understand it. So we're very lucky, Rob, Peter, and myself. We have a distribution list that when we're in trouble, we can go on very quickly, and we don't need to go through Microsoft support. You get the product group straight away. And I came up with this, and I said, I don't know how to fix this. And Gerry Liu, he's one of the product group guys. The man is gifted. But he came back and he said, Gerry, we've seen this in testing. I thought, hey, great. What was it? He said, check the time on the system hosting the CMG connection point. I said, no, that's not it. We've done that. He said, I'm telling you, check the time. I said, okay. So we went back and we checked the time on the box against an NTP server. We moved it back 17 seconds and it worked. That's harsh. That is harsh. How do you find that? Yeah, so I reported it as a bug and I was politely told it wasn't. So there's some kind of race condition between something gets created and if it's in the future, it doesn't know it's created before this thing gets done. It's a bit of a mess, so that's why. So we got it working. So what do you do when you solve your CMG problem? You do your CMG dance. All right? So that's us on. Thank you very much.